What a beautiful sight to behold. This is the Sega Genesis Model 1, the Sega Genesis Model 2. What comes after 2? It's the Model 3 Sega Genesis. The newest, lightest, and cheapest Sega Genesis of them all. But it's still a Sega Genesis, even if it was manufactured by Majesco. As far as I'm concerned, this fits in with the other ones because it works just as well. It really does, and it looks nice, even if it's tiny and has every single thing that may have cost anything stripped out of it. Doesn't even have a light. Just has a little red sticker that tells you the thing is on. That's clever, it works. Let's insert a video game, Virtua Fighter 2, which was played using the Sega Genesis Model 3 for the review of Virtua Fighter 2. That's a lot of numbers. Anytime they manufacture another game console in a series, it usually becomes smaller and cheaper. We've seen this with the PlayStation 2, the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and so forth. The Model 1 was a giant beast with big on-off switch there, stereo, headphone adapter, lots of inputs and outputs on the back. And then the Model 2 comes along and it reduces the number of inputs and outputs. It has one light there. This one also has a light. But no longer do we have the headphone jack. No longer does it output stereo. And the Model 3 has the least of all. There's your AV output. There's your power. That's it. That's all you get. And it's small. Super light. But hold on. Don't just rush out and buy one yet, because there may be something that's missing from here that's important to you. And no, I'm not talking about its incompatibility with Virtua Racing, because you really shouldn't be playing that game on the Genesis anyway. The 32X version is much better. Wait a second, this doesn't work with the 32X. It doesn't. It also doesn't work with the Sega CD because it doesn't have the Sega CD attachment thing on the side. That's right, those were all removed. And this also does not work with the Power Base Converter so that you can play Sega Master Systems on it. You can play the majority, the vast majority, of Sega Genesis games. And that's it, period. But the thing that I like is that it does work just as well as the Model 2. The Model 1 is still my favorite because it has stereo, but this thing is great in a pinch. As I said, I used it to review Virtua Fighter 2. I've also used this in the review of Raid and Trad. I used this one because I played it on a different television and just wanted the smallest, most convenient Genesis. That's this one. Each Sega Genesis uses a different power adapter. Always make sure you have the right one. The Model 3 works with the MK1479, which also works with the Sega Nomad. Now, even though this uses different power adapters and all that stuff, it does use the same AV output cable that the Model 2 uses, as well as the Sega 32X. Just something to keep in mind. And obviously it works with the exact same Sega Genesis controllers that any Sega Genesis works with. This one originally came with a later version of the Sega Genesis controller, one that looks like this with 6 buttons. You know what game is terrific on the Sega Genesis Model 3? Truxton. Truxton happens to be terrific no matter what you play it on. That really has no point whatsoever. By the way, that's the reset button. Stylistically, I think that the Model 3 is better looking than the Model 2. It seems to make sense. It's small, it's tidy, all the lines come together nicely. I like the giant 3 on the front of it. I think that the Model 2 looks somewhat awkward. I never really cared for the design of the Model 2. The Model 3 is an improvement, although you really should be watching your video games on screen rather than staring at your Sega Genesis, but they designed the thing, I may as well point it out. There's only a small handful of games that don't work with the Model 3, and if you're concerned, check online and make sure before you buy one, but I don't think you'll have a problem. All the Sonic games work, Virtua Fighter, and I know that one game that doesn't work is Virtua Racing, but as I said, I think that if you want to play Virtua Racing, play that on the Sega 32X, which won't work on here anyway, so keep that in mind. I don't think you're missing that much. I mean, Truxton works on here. That's important. And you can find these affordably online these days with no problem. If we look on the underside, it has a serial number and it says Genesis System Console, and that looks like somebody's initials. I will say that this was donated to Classic Game Room by Frank in California, who donated all kinds of goodies, including the Sega Genesis Model 3, helping to keep Classic Game Room running when space is in short supply. Sometimes you never know when you need a smaller Sega Genesis. It has a nice textured surface, and if you rub it, you can make a wish. That probably won't come true. Unless you wish for Truxton, in which case, it does come true. Because there it is. Hooray! Sega Genesis Model 3, making wishes come true. I wish that the Sega Genesis Model 3 worked with Double Dragon 3 for the Sega Genesis, and that the packaging artwork would be really cheesy. Wow! My wish is granted.